Hey everyone, welcome to COMP1531 on Tuesday of week 2. What a profoundly organized morning we're all having. So today I was really hoping to I was really hoping to spend the first 10 minutes going through some slides of what I was calling Teamwork Tuesday, which is basically I wrote down kind of 8 things. I wrote down 8 things that could be relevant to teamwork and leadership in this course, and essentially they're mainly kind of stories or learnings from my own life, which include kind of five kind of dramatic events, and then 3 kind of big broad lessons that I guess came out of the broader events. So the idea is that throughout weeks 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 9, 10, I guess maybe not 10, but there's like 8 things, and then every week I'm going to get you guys, you can pick one which sounds interesting, or sometimes we'll do ones that sound relevant to what we're doing. I'd love to like talk more about my startup stuff, but the problem with startups is that startups are just very small teams, so I don't think there's actually a ton of like teamwork relevant stuff in startup land. But we're going to do this at the end now because I don't want to talk about this until 10:25 a.m. So anyway, you can have a look at this, and hopefully at like 10:50 we can stop what we're doing, and you guys can be like, that one sounds interesting, let's chat about that. But in the meantime, we're going to get stuck into Python 2.4, which is all about importing and paths. Now, this is like one of those lectures. It's really hard with Python because I kind of wish we could give you like 10 lectures in the first week and just kind of teach you all the basics of Python. But sadly, we have so many things to cover. But this one is really about all that stuff you've seen where, if I have like a Python file somewhere, if I go to my lectures here, content, lecture code, you've probably seen in some Python files that we wrote that up the top of some files is like import sys, like this. And then you would have seen other files where you import numpy as something, and then other files import star from lib. And there's like a lot of different ways to kind of to hash include, I guess, that maybe aren't as obvious. Like, because C is quite straightforward, right? Like in C, you literally in C are just like, oh yeah, we're just gonna like hash include this, and that's like the extent of it. And essentially in C, it's really simple. Like when you have a file, like when you have like file 1.h or something, and this is like you're in like I'm like this is file 2.h. Basically, all an include does is copy and paste the code at compile time. Like the compiler will literally go and take the contents of file 1 and just like crap it into the top of your file. Which means that anything defined in file 1 is essentially immediately in the global scope. So because of that, the importing in C is simple, but maybe not, we don't have as firm a control as we might have in a language like Python. So I just kind of talked to that. Down we go. But let's actually have a look at how some importing works, because there's a few subtleties in Python that can make it, like while it's very powerful, it can also make it very challenging. So we've got these 2 files called calmath, as in calendarmath.py, and import2, as in import, import to something. Sorry, I just noticed how dirty I think the camera is. Could be wrong, but anyway. Maybe I was wrong. So I'm going to go open these 2 files, right, in Sublime, and we can have a look at them. So let's see here. We got, where is it? Import 2. It's hiding in another folder, is it? Oh no. Okay, let's have a look. It might be hiding in the week 3 folder. Or week 1. Oh no. Oh, there it is. Import 2 and calmath. Sometimes I move content around. So inside the week 1 folder, we've got these 2 files, import2 and calmath. Now take a look at calmath. It's a pretty straightforward function. It's like, it takes a month, right, where 0 is January, 1's February, and it takes a day from 1 to 31, or 0 to 31? 0 to 31. And it basically just like craps out a like total number of days into the year. So like right now in February, we're like 31 days of January. It's the 23rd today. We're 31 days in January plus 23 days in February, which means that we are 54 days into the year, right? So this is quite a straightforward function that most of you could probably understand relatively quickly, or at least what it does at a high level relatively quickly. And then we have this other function here called quick test. Now we're kind of glossing over that PyTest aspect right now, but basically quick test here just prints out month 0, day 0 equals days into year 0, 0. So we pass in like the 1st of January, and then we print out the days into the year of the 11th month and the 31st day, which is December 32nd technically. There could be a bug here. So that's what that function does, and then we call that function quick test. So this is a Python file you might kind of write. Maybe you're not as comfortable with the PyTest stuff yet, so you just kind of write a simple function. And then I run python3 calmath.py, and I get that output. Now clearly there's some kind of bug here, because since we start at 0, it should only go up to 364, right? Because we start at 0. So in reality, you might write a PyTest or something to fail this, and this is a great example of what could be a lab question. But here's the thing. Quite often when you write stuff in Python, you're right, I did miss a month, thank you. Did I? No, did I? I don't think I did I? Because this is November. So it's saying if it's greater than November. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I think it's okay. Yeah, so what happens often when you write libraries in Python, when you write files, is that before you know it, they can actually become libraries. And what a library is a Python file that does something that you actually want to use in another file. So let's say you write this calmath file where you create a days into year function. Okay, that's pretty straightforward. But now I want to use that in another file. So there's a few ways you can do this, which comes down to the importing rules. The first one is that in your import to file, right, which is just a separate file in the same folder, I can import calmath. Now you're probably quite familiar with import sys, because we talked about it in week 1, which was kind of like importing a system library. So just like in C, how you can like in C you can import these like system libraries, and then you also know you can import like your own. Like you might have done something like this, where this is like system library and this is like my library. In Python we can import them both, but the pattern of how it looks is kind of similar. So import sys is importing the Sys library, and that allows us to do something interesting, which is, you know, saying, hey, if the number of argvs passed in is not equal to 3, which is to say that there's 2 arguments, right? Because if the length of if argc is 3, then there's 2 argvs that have been passed in. If it's not equal to 3, then we want to just print out and be like, sorry that you've used this program wrong. And if it is equal to 3, then what you want to be able to do is actually like use calmath, use some function in another file. So to use this function, we can just import calmath here. And when we import calmath, just like this, where it's just import file, this name here essentially becomes a representation of that whole file. So what I mean by that is when I want to call that function, I have to call calmath dot days into year, because I'm saying I want to get the calmath file and I want to get the function in it called days into year, and then I'm going to pass in argv and argc. Let me just close Teams. Last time I had a bunch of students going crazy because they heard like Teams and Slack notifications on the recordings, and they were like, oh my god. Anyway, so that was a very boring story. So, you know, if we want this to work, and you'll see what happens here is that when I run this, right, I'm going to run import to, python3 import to, and we get this. So it actually says to me usage import to month, day, month, because I didn't pass it in. So if I say February 23, which is 122 because we count from 0, I get this 53. That's my output. That's what I print, which is really good. So you can see that I can import it that way. Catherine says you don't need .py. Does it need to be in the same folder to import it that way? It does need to be in the same folder to import it that way. You know, your project is a bit more complicated, which we'll try and talk about. But you don't need to do .py. I think you might be able to. I'm not sure if the interpreter will just be like, all right, I'll do that anyway. No. But no, you definitely don't need the .py. Basically, if you're ever importing something in Python, it's expecting that file type to be a .python file. So the interpreter kind of handles that for you. Sys.argv was covered in a lecture last week, I believe. We covered it in our Introduction to Python lecture, so you can go and have a look at that. So in this case, we take in our sysargv1 and our sysargv2, which are these two things here. We pass it into days into year. We convert it to integers first because this function is expecting integers. And all the argv values are strings, right? So if I don't turn these into ints, then watch what happens. I'll get an error. It says, sorry, but you're trying to do a greater than this operation here between instances of string and int. So Panda Guy, it's a funny name, Panda Guy's asked a great question, which is, why when we run this, does it, why does quick test get executed over here? Right, why is this line here? Like, I just want to execute this line here. My output should only print one line, but for some reason it's printing 2, which includes quick test. And this is now really important, and it comes down to the, you've probably seen this either around the internet, or you've probably seen it around the internet if you've been looking for it. But this little funny line here, which is if name is equal to main. Now here's what I want to show you. There's this weird thing in Python where there's this magical variable that is defined. You don't have to define it, it's just always defined for you. And it's called __name__, right? And watch what happens to this variable name when I run calmath, right? And when I remember running calmath is me trying to run my quick test function. So you can see that that name is __main__. That is a string. It's the this variable here has value this 8-character string main. Watch what happens when I run import to. It actually prints out the word calmath, and that's because the way Python works is when I run import to, as part of the importing process, it has to go through and basically do a sweep and execute everything in calmath, right? So it like, oh, I'm storing this function, I'm storing that function, I have to print something, I have to print something. That's like the 4 things it does to prepare itself to be part of import to. So those function definitions obviously don't have an effect until they're called, but these 2 print statements are executed immediately. So there's a programming pattern in Python where you notice that when I call the calmath file directly, the value of _name is _main. But when I call it, when this function is run because I imported it, right? So when it's kind of run indirectly or run because of someone else, then the value of _name is actually the file name. Now, why it's the file name isn't really relevant here, but what's important is that there's the standard pattern in Python is that if you have code that you only want to run when your file is executed directly and not when it's imported, you can actually wrap it in this very straightforward if name equals main function here, because it's like if the variable _name is equal to the string _main, this is only true when this function is being, when this file is being, what would you say, like, run directly on command line. So this is useful because now I can call calmath, like this, and I get my quick test print, and I can call Python 3 import 1.2, and it doesn't run quick test this time. Now this really, really is quite literally the equivalent of int main argc, you know. It's really the equivalent of that. So if you're used to main functions and this kind of idea that Python, that you need like a main place to run it, then you could put all of that code in here. Obviously, Python's very flexible, as in if you don't put code inside this if name equals main, it will still execute it. But generally speaking, you'll find that most Python programs are a series of functions and then an if name equals main block. Right? Yeah, so if it's imported _name equals calmath. So, yeah, you'll see this here is like in the first case, sorry, when I run calmath directly, _name is _main. But when I run it with import to _name is calmath. So therefore this piece of code doesn't run. So this little if statement here ensures that that everything inside of it only runs if I'm calling this calmath file directly on command line. Not that it's being imported, but if I'm actually calling it directly. Catherine says, so you put a list at the bottom under if name equals main, it doesn't run these when called indirectly. Yeah, I don't know if by list you mean a literal list, like a equals 1, 2, 3. Like none of this code here is called if it's imported, only when it's run directly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Praf's right. So when it's imported, this _name changes, and therefore it's not run. And Python sets the value of name, so you don't have to worry about that. And yes, Catherine. So if you have a function in here that's like def hello, that just like prints hello, yeah, it doesn't exist. So if I tried to, for instance, inside my import to print calmath.hello, this, I don't need to print it because it's already printing. This will not work, right? It'll be like, sorry, that's not defined. Module calmath has no attribute hello. Whereas if I move it above the name equals main, then it is actually executed during the import, and I will actually get it printed out. Because an import really is Python just going through another file and executing everything. It's just that like when I say executing it, it's like executing a function definition just means storing that function in RAM ready to go if someone calls it. And if you want to run everything, you just remove the if statement, right? Yeah, that's true. Are there any other pre-assigned Python variables worth knowing? Yeah, there are. What was it? Dunderscore variables Python. They call __Dunderscore, I believe. Or some people do. Like all my phonetic Python friends call it that. But apparently Google doesn't like it. There's other variable names. I just don't really use any others. There's probably a correct description of these that I'm not using, which is why we can't find them. But you can go look them up. I don't think any other besides main are really relevant. So last question here. Catherine said, "What if you want to be able to access the function in the secondary file, but not have it automatically run?" Well, remember, it's not run until you call it. So even though these are accessible in the secondary file, but they're not really run until I call them. So as long as I don't call these functions, it's okay. If I call them though, then it becomes used there. Sys.argv, command line arguments do exist in Python. Yeah, they do. So just quickly on this topic here, which we're talking about imports, there's also 3 types of imports that I want to touch on briefly too. This is a very theoretical example here, but I'll show you actually just with this example we have here. So the 3 types of imports are import calmath, from calmath import days into year, and then import star from calmath import star. Was that the 3? Import star from sure, okay, wrong way around. Okay, so these are the 3 different ways you can import. Now let's contrast them. Import calmath. What this does is this basically takes everything in the file, all the function definitions and global variable definitions, and it attaches it to the name calmath. So like if I have a variable here called like name or like first name equals Hayden, then I can actually print this out too. I can go print calmath.firstname. So every global function or global variable is attached to the calmath name. Now this is handy. It's super convenient because you can kind of import everything. It's generally not a bad way to import. Sometimes it just requires more text. The second way to import is to do this one here, from calmath import days into year. So what this import does by comparison is that it says we're not going to use the calmath variable. We're going to take particular function names or particular function names or particular variable names, and we're going to import them directly into the global scope. So what I mean by that is if I do from calmath import days into year, then to run days into year, I don't need the calmath dot. So the from file import stuff puts stuff as immediately used variables. So you can just use days into year if you'd like. There's nothing crazy about it. And this is often the preferred way to import in Python for a couple of reasons. The first one is that it saves on a lot of text, right? So I don't have to do like calmath.this, calmath.that, calmath.this. And secondly, you're only importing what you need, which is kind of useful from like a, if you're here trying to see this, if someone just says import calmath, you're like, what the hell is calmath? What's everything in there? Why are you even using that? Whereas if you do it by say, from the calmath file, I'd like to import functions or variable names called days into year, you're kind of saying, you're making it really clear to programmers what you're importing. And you can also import multiple things by just adding a comma. So I could import days into year, quick test, and first name like this. Could import all three of those things, which can be very helpful. And then I could use them too, right? I could just say print first name, like that. Now, the main benefit of this import calmath one is that you'll never get name conflicts. Like when you do this from file import properties approach, sometimes like what happens if in my import to file, I already have a variable name called first name, right? This isn't super handy because if I've already got a variable name called first name, then it's going to cause some havoc, right? So like when I run this, for instance, you see it actually prints out John, because even though I imported first name, my local global definition of it overrode it, and therefore first name here was John. So that's the main downside of this approach, is that if what you're importing has a lot of name conflicts with what you're writing, then generally you might want to look at the import calmath approach, because that can be kind of easier. But yeah, this one is probably like the most common type of importing, where you say from a file import this. If we want to import, should it be in the same directory? It doesn't have to be. For simple imports, it's easier if it's in the same directory. Patrick says, does this mean we can write most of our code elsewhere and use one file as the main running file? Yeah, it's exactly like C or other programming languages. You want to break it up. Cap says, does that mean you don't need the if name equals main bit then? That's a great question, Cap. I've actually honestly never thought of that recently, but let's try that out. Let's just put a print here. Hi, I reckon you will need it. What's the problem? What's the problem? I didn't even read the error. Name days into year is not defined. Name first name is not defined. I have to import that. Yeah, so as you can see here, it does print out hi, and that's because I assume that it does a full sweep of the file, and then it only actually exposes certain functions or variables that you've asked for. Raymond says, would it be possible to import quick test which uses days into year function? Yes, it would. That's a good question as well. So Raymond's kind of said, if I import quick test, do I need to import days into year because quick test actually uses days into year? And the answer is no. So like you only need to worry about what you're exposed to here. So you see that if you import QuickTest and you run QuickTest, then it internal to the file is able to like figure out what it needs, because this whole file is loaded into. This whole file is kind of loaded there, but it's just like the import tells you what is exposed, in a way. In terms of like you can't just call first name because you didn't import it, even though it's probably sitting there somewhere in memory in case something in this file actually needs it. If there are like 6 functions, are we using, is adding commas still feasible in import? Yeah, definitely. In Python, you can break things up on multiple lines just by using a backslash. So if you have like import a, like this, and you add more, you can actually just put a backslash there and do some spaces and be like E, F, G, H, I, J. Like you can do that if you want to. That's perfectly fine. I don't think 6 functions importing is a great reason not to use this approach, but you can if you want. But if you have a lot of functions and globals in a file, would import CalMath be better? Look, I mean, both of these are fine. I don't want you to kind of go away thinking if I do one of these, I'm going to get in trouble. Because they're both fine. It's just when you want to use them. You'll notice that most examples on the internet use import sys instead of from sys import this. I think that's probably because sys has some really simple basic functions like argv, exit. But you'll see most other examples will be like from so and so import something. I mean, honestly, I think at this point it's best just to say to you like both are fine. This one is probably more common, but both are fine. And play around with it, like figure out what works. You'll get a natural sense of the benefits and drawbacks of these as you go to use them more. But the one point is that the one thing we don't want to use is this import star from CalMath. And the reason we don't want to use this one is, oh sorry, did I do that wrong? I think I was wondering why. I think I definitely have those lecture slides wrong. Yeah. Silly. I'll fix that up later. So import from CalMath import stars. This is kind of like a way of saying, go and get all the functions and variables from the file and import them as if you basically did like import ABC. So rather than writing out A, B, C, D, E, F, G here, you can actually say, I'd like you to import every possible thing you can. Now the reason this one sucks, like the thing you might be thinking that's good is like, oh great, now I can use all my functions and variables without having to write them all out and without having to do calmath dot like that. And the bad thing about this though is that you've completely you've from a design perspective, this is dangerous because when you do explicit imports, you're essentially controlling what exists in that file, as in like if you have like another variable called like first name, if someone comes along and wants to add a local first name variable, that person using this file can actually see, oh, this is already a name that's imported, I should change that name. Whereas if you do from calmath import star, you kind of remove anyone's ability to understand what else might be imported. It also allows people to accidentally use things they didn't intend to. So for instance, quick test here is now usable even if it has no purpose and use. So generally this is a very bad method. This is the kind of method you would get penalized for. So don't do the third way. Just do one of the first two there. So Yudhishthira says this would cause a lot of hidden name conflict. Yeah, it would. Exactly. Alex said, is there a way to import a specific function while still needing the calmath prefix? Not to my knowledge. Maybe there is one, but not to my knowledge. Karel, yes, that's correct. And what's the main difference between from calmath import star and import calmath? Well, I mean, I don't know if you should compare those because import calmath from star is more like the second method, which is importing names directly into the scope, whereas import calmath is just allowing you to access everything via a calmath variable, calmath like name. Last question I'll answer, then we can move on, is Joshua said, can we import as? Yeah, you can. So there's another thing which you probably won't really have to do in the course, but is very useful to know, which is if for some reason a function name is a conflict, right, as in you're already using that name, or perhaps you don't like the name or you don't think it's descriptive enough, you can actually change it. For instance, I could change first name here. I could alias it, we call it, and say first name as CalMath first name. So what this is really doing here is saying, you know what, I don't want you to actually import first name directly, like the name. I'm going to actually say, I'd like you to import first name, but this is the variable name we're going to call it. So you'll see now, when I try and run this, it actually throws an error and it says, sorry, first name is not defined. That's because while we imported it from this file, we gave it a different name. So now to use it, I could give it a name like that, and now it would work. This is mainly useful, again, for conflicts, or if you're trying to give it a better variable name. I don't really have an example off the top of my head, but that's a useful thing to know, because you might see that around the internet, or you might run into an instance where you want to change the name of the imported variable. Generally, it's not advised unless you have a reason to do it, because it's like if you do something like from sys import argv as sysargv, now suddenly someone who's a programmer has to figure out what the hell the variable sysargv is, because they're probably used to this name argv generally. Yeah, there are cases where people do the imports that way to kind of shorten names and stuff. That's fine too, but generally, like, as is a little bit of an extra thing. Okay. So this is possibly a little bit... This lecture, I think, is actually a lot less useful. The second part of this lecture is a lot less useful than it used to be. And the reason is because we fixed some things up with the project. But I just want to quickly talk about the project because importing and paths kind of are irrelevant here. So this is all about importing still. So when it comes to the project, right? And remember, this is my local copy of the project that I made yesterday. One thing you'll notice about the project is the way imports happen. So you'll notice that, for instance, inside my test file, I import PyTest here. We'll talk about this in the next lecture. But when I want to import from echo, I actually do from source.echo import echo. Now people have been asking, like, does it have to be in the same folder? And the answer is no. One of the tricky things about Python, though, is that when Python tries to resolve paths, what it actually, like when you run like PyTest or something, what it actually tries to do is it sets the base path to the folder you're running things in. So what I mean by that is, let's try here and actually just run test echo directly. So we're going to bypass PyTest for a sec. So I'm going to go into the test folder, and then I'm going to run Python 3 echo test. Now, I get this error here, no module named source. And the reason for that is because what PyTest is what my echo test file is trying to do is it is trying to say from the source folder file echo import the property echo. From the source file, from the source folder file error import input error. So just like how in C you can say like include like .. /blah/ list.h, or you can say, you know, from blah / list.h. Like you can actually refer to things in different folders. In Python the syntax is a little bit simpler, but the point here is you'll notice that it's failing. It's saying no module named source. So Python is looking for a source folder, but it can't actually find it. Now pay attention to this bit quite closely. This is because I'm running my echo test directly from the test folder. If we go back a folder and we try and run test/echo test, right? So we're running the same file, it's just we're running it from a different folder. Everything works now. And the reason for that is because when you run a Python program, what actually happens is that all of the all of the imports can be looked up from the folder that you run the Python command in, or the PyTest command in. So what I mean by that is I'm running it now in the week 2 backend folder, right? And from this folder, there is another folder called source. And then, oops, there's VLab, oh, yep. And then from source, if I go inside source, there's another file called echo. So that is kind of how the importing works. Because I ran Python from a folder, that's where everything imports from. And the reason this is important is because when you're running PyTest, when you're running, like if you want to run a file directly, maybe inside of auth, you've got like a if name equals main to run something here. Hello, like print hi. Then I'm pretty sure like you need to run this from the main folder, right? Source/auth. Whereas if I go inside source and I try and run auth, it's going to say, I don't know what source is, because it tried to import source.data and it just crapped its pants. And this is kind of a general idea to follow in Python. There are ways around this, but when you're writing imports, you always write them relative to like the place you're going to run everything in the project. And generally, you run Python 3 from the same folder in the project. And if you want to run different files in different folders, you still run Python 3 from the same place, which in this case is our root directory of the project. You just say like Python 3 source/this/that. That's how you run it. By the way, these slides here, these actually don't matter. I'm going to delete them from the deck because this was before, so what we've done this term is we've made a really rigid project directory which solves some of these problems that this lecture was trying to work around. So this part of the lecture doesn't really matter. But yeah, so that's the crux of it. And when you want to import stuff in your project, for instance, you actually just do more imports, assuming that it's importing it from the main directory. So I might say from source.channels import channels list v1, like that. That's how you do that. And if you're not sure, play around with it. There's only like 4 or 5 different combinations of things that you can do, and then one of them will work. Just quickly on this topic as well, I'm going to have a quick look at this group's project backend. Congrats to Amin for pushing code. So one thing I just want you all to pay attention to is that sometimes we make updates to the spec, and we made an update last night, and I don't think it's being merged in automatically, which I might have to change something about. So normally what happens is when we make updates to the spec, we actually can push them out to your group repo as a merge request. And then they get merged into your repo. Now, it looks like at a glance for me that GitLab's had an update where this doesn't maybe happen automatically, because normally this should just get merged in automatically. So there's probably all of your projects, there's a merge request that I made that's sitting here waiting to be merged in. So every time you kind of log in, take a look at this like little merge request thing, and if it doesn't say 0, obviously it might be because your group's made some merge requests, but maybe like we push the merge request. So if you click on this and you go to changes, you'll actually see that we just like added a line to the spec, which is just a clarification here that students are asking about. So you can then just go and merge that in, and I'm going to do this for this group. And then that'll just be part of your main repo now. So we should get this working so that it automatically merges in, but yeah, keep an eye on that. Taylor says, can you selectively import dictionary structures? I don't know what you mean by selectively import dictionary structures. So you can just do it once per group. You don't need to individually merge it in. You're all sharing a repo. Yeah, I'll just answer Taylor's question, then we'll move on to the next thing. So when you say just maybe Taylor, when you say can selectively you import dictionary structures, you can, like, if you have like a file called channels, and you just say like hey equals a dictionary, you can just import that too. Like in echo test, you can just import hey the dictionary. Can you guys hear the birds? It's so fascinating. Didn't realize that. So cute. Yeah, so that's kind of the crux of that. Anyway, I want to wrap this one up. If you have any further questions, maybe save them for the forum for now, and we'll go from there. But yeah, so this is kind of the key things on importing.